Emma's hands trembled as she stepped into the grand marble lobby, gripping her file of employment documents like a shield. Everything felt too clean, too silent, too far from the small town where she had grown up invisible. Her eyes stayed low, afraid to meet the gaze of anyone important, especially him. Everyone at the hotel whispered about Mr. Sinclair, the billionaire who owned the entire top floor, and spoke to no one. They said he hadn't smiled in years, that his touch was colder than the steel he built his empire on. Emma didn't want attention. She just wanted to work, to disappear, to be safe. But the moment she stepped into the elevator alone, the doors opened again and there he stood. Their eyes met for a second too long, and something sharp and unfamiliar passed between them. He barely nodded, stepping in like she was invisible, but she felt the air shift as if something cracked open. Emma kept her head down, her heart pounding, too loud, trying not to breathe too heavily in his presence. He smelled of expensive cologne and something colder, like marble, distance, and thunder. Mr. Sinclair said nothing. But when she exited, his eyes followed her through the polished reflection on the elevator doors. She thought nothing of it, told herself she was imagining things that men like him didn't notice, girls like her. But in his suite later that night, he poured whiskey slowly and remembered the tremble in her hands. He had touched no one for years, had closed every door inside him, but her silence made noise. And for the first time in a long time, he couldn't stop thinking about someone he barely knew. Emma was careful, always. But that day her nerves betrayed her. She spilled coffee outside his office. She knelt quickly, trying to clean it with shaking hands, her face burning with humiliation. He watched from the hallway, unseen, unmoved but not untouched. Something about the way she avoided eye contact, how she bit her lip to keep from crying, unsettled him deeply. She expected to be fired, or worse noticed, but no one said a word. Later she found a new pair of shoes in her locker, the exact pair she had ruined. No note, no explanation, just silence in the shape of kindness. And she knew, without being told, that it was him. That Mr. Sinclair was known for his cold efficiency. No one entered his suite without purpose, and no one touched his heart. He dismissed meetings with a glance, rejected emotion like it was weakness, and lived behind locked doors. Even his assistants spoke in whispers, saying he hadn't dated anyone since the scandal years ago. No one knew what had broken him, only that whatever it was, it left him unrecognizable. But Emma didn't know. That version of him, she only knew the man who stared too long and said too little. He noticed her now, even if he didn't want to, and when their paths crossed, silence grew heavier. She became a presence in his life like music behind glass, quiet, distant, but impossible to ignore. And though he didn't understand it, he began adjusting his schedule to pass her in the halls. It was raining when she stayed late, organizing papers alone in the archive room downstairs. He entered without warning, soaked from the storm, looking for something he couldn't find. She froze, unsure if she should speak, but he said, "You don't have to be afraid of me." Her voice cracked when she replied, "I'm not afraid, just careful." That made him pause because it sounded like something he once told himself. They stood in silence, the sound of rain filling the space between them like a fragile bridge. He looked at her as if he saw something unfamiliar in her innocence, something both comforting and dangerous. And before he left, he said softly, "You shouldn't stay here too late. Not everyone is harmless." What Emma didn't know was that Mr. Sinclair had a live feed to the lower levels of the hotel. He had installed it after a past betrayal. He told himself he was checking for security, but his eyes lingered longer when they landed on her. She would hum softly while cleaning, bite her lip while reading, fidget with the ends of her sleeves when anxious. It wasn't obsession yet. It was no longer just curiosity. He didn't trust easily, didn't feel easily, but watching her felt calming. She reminded him of something he had forgotten existed, gentleness without expectation. And one night, when he saw her cry quietly in the hallway, he stood in front of the screen for hours, because in her sadness, he saw a reflection of his own. The invitation came in the most unexpected way. An assistant handed Emma a sealed envelope with her name in silver ink. Inside, a card read, "Dinner, 8 p.m., Suite 74, come as you are." Her heart nearly stopped, and for a moment she wondered if it was a cruel joke. She considered not going, but curiosity and something deeper tugged at her feet. When she knocked at the door that night, he opened it himself. No suit, no tie, just a black shirt and tired eyes. They ate in near silence, but he watched her closely, as if every forkful told him something new. She spoke softly, only when spoken to, but her words made him feel more than any boardroom had in years. And when she left, he stood in the doorway for several minutes, unable to return to the silence. After that dinner, something shifted, small gestures, subtle changes in rhythm. He greeted her with nods now, sometimes even words. She smiled more often, even when no one saw. Emma started noticing little things like how he never touched his glass until she did, and he began noticing the way her voice trembled less when she spoke to him. They were not friends, not lovers, not anything the world would understand, but something was forming. He still kept his distance physically, but emotionally. She was getting closer than anyone had in years. One morning, he said. You look tired. And when she laughed and said, so do you, he actually smiled. And that one smile stayed in her heart for days. She found him in the rooftop garden one night, something no one else had ever seen him, alone under the stars. He didn't send her away. Instead, he asked, do you believe people can change? She said, only if they really want to, and if someone sees something worth saving in them. He looked at her as if those words reached somewhere too deep to explain, and then he told her quietly, like a man confessing to God, that he once loved someone who destroyed everything. I stopped touching people after her, he said. It felt safer. She didn't try to fix him, she simply said, then maybe you need someone who won't break, so I. And though he didn't reply, he didn't walk away either. It was accidental, a brush of fingers when she handed him his coffee. But the moment their skin met, both of them froze, something electric and terrifying crackling between them. Emma pulled her hand back quickly, cheeks flushed, and he stared at his own fingers as if they'd betrayed him. Neither spoke of it, but something had broken open. He found himself replaying that second over and over, trying to understand what it meant. And she, lying awake that night, touched her palm and wondered how something so small could feel so important. From that day on, their silences were different, heavier, charged, waiting, because they both knew the wall between them had cracked. Emma began to feel his eyes more than she saw them in elevators, in reflections, during quiet moments alone. He never stared blatantly, but she sensed it, like a hum beneath her skin, an invisible thread between them. She didn't know if it was danger, desire, or something more complicated, something softer, maybe even fragile. She tried to stay invisible, but something in her wanted to be seen by him, wanted to matter. Alexander fought it too. He told himself she was just a phase, a distraction, a moment, but the way she bit her lip when nervous stayed in his mind, like the taste of a memory he hadn't earned. He used to look through people now. With her, he looked at someone again, and it terrified him. One morning she was stopped by one of the senior staff, Miss Carson, older, sharp-eyed, always watching. Be careful, she said, lips tight. Men like him don't get attached. They break things they touch. Emma blinked, unsure whether to defend him or herself, but said nothing. That day, Alexander barely looked at her, and she wondered if he was pulling away again. He had overheard the conversation through the hallway monitors, and it left him colder than usual. Part of him wanted to protect her from himself, and part of him hated how much she affected him. He spent the day in silence, watching the rain against the glass, remembering how her voice softened storms. And when she passed by that night without speaking, something inside him twisted with regret. It was late, and the elevator suddenly stopped between floors, an old system flaw no one had fixed. Emma panicked, clutching the handrail, her breathing shallow in the tight space. He was beside her, close, too close, and for the first time, he saw her fear unmasked. It's okay, he said, voice lower than usual. You're safe. I'm here, she nodded, but tears slipped down her cheeks, and he did something no one expected. He reached out. His hand gently touched hers, not possessive, not forceful, just there, steady, warm, real. I don't like small spaces either, he admitted, surprising even himself. And in that moment, their hearts beat louder than the silence between them. When the elevator resumed, neither spoke until she stepped off. He called after her softly, Emma? She turned around, startled that he used her name. It sounded like a secret on his lips. I don't want you to be afraid of me, he said, even when I don't know how to act right. She smiled, fragile but genuine, and whispered, I'm not afraid. I just don't know what this is. He didn't either, but he knew it was no longer avoidable. That night, he stood alone by his window, tracing the ghost of her touch on his hand, and for the first time in years, he didn't drink to fall asleep. He began skipping meetings. His partners noticed. The board noticed. They whispered about a girl's soft plane, too fragile for his world. Emma, unaware, kept to herself, still cleaning, still hiding in her own way. But Alexander watched her more openly now, like a man, resisting gravity and slowly losing. One afternoon, she caught his gaze and didn't look away. That single moment made his chest ache because it felt like hope, and hope was dangerous. He told his assistant to clear the next 3 days. He needed time to think, to breathe, or maybe to fall apart. Another note arrived, no assistant this time, just left on her cart. Come back to the rooftop garden. Tonight, no questions. Emma debated going. Every part of her said she shouldn't, but her heart overruled her fears. She found him there, not in black, but in a soft gray sweater and bare feet on the stone floor. He didn't speak right away. He just handed her a mug of tea, still hot, still thoughtful. Then he said, I don't let people close, but I don't want to push you away. She sat down beside him, heart pounding. Then maybe. Don't. And in the quiet that followed, the distance between them melted just enough to let warmth in. Under the stars, Alexander finally spoke of the woman who had once betrayed him, his ex, his first wound. She didn't cheat on me. She used me, lied about the child, took millions, left a hollow where trust used to live. Emma didn't interrupt. She simply listened, like no one had ever listened to him without expecting something in return. He looked at her and said, Since then, I haven't touched anyone. I haven't felt anything. She could have pulled away, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered, then maybe I'm not the only one who's scared. That night, he didn't kiss her. He just held her hand longer, tighter, like it was the only honest thing he had. And she let him. The next morning, everything felt brighter but more dangerous. In the hallway, he brushed her arm gently, almost without meaning to. She looked up, startled, and in that second, they were too close emotionally, physically, everything. If someone had passed, it would have looked like a lover's moment. He stepped back quickly, his mask returning, but the damage was done. People began talking, whispers louder than before, eyes sharper, questions brewing. Emma found a note on her locker. He's only curious. Don't mistake it for love. She threw it away, but the words echoed louder than she wished. She sat, alone that night, remembering every time he made her feel Sanand, every time he disappeared again. Her heart ached, not from rejection, but from uncertainty, from never knowing what she truly meant to him. Emma didn't want to be a fantasy or a project. She wanted to be chosen. So she wrote him a letter she never meant to send. I'm not perfect, and I don't know how to belong in your world, but I see you, and I care, and I wish that were enough. She burned the letter before dawn. But the pain didn't leave, and she started avoiding him again. Alexander noticed her withdrawal instantly. She no longer looked his way, no longer smiled, no longer lingered in the halls. At first he tried to ignore it, but silence had a way of becoming unbearable when you'd already let someone in. He asked his assistant about her schedule. He waited by the elevators. He even stood outside the staff lounge. But she wasn't there. She was hiding from him, from everything they had almost become. And suddenly, all the things he thought he didn't need, her voice, her gaze, her presence became everything. He sat in the rooftop garden alone, holding the tea she used to drink. And for the first time in years, he was the one hurting, because something had broken inside them, both, and now he feared it might not heal. A storm returned to the city, almost as if mirroring everything Emma felt inside. She walked slowly through the side hallway, soaked, her heart heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. Alexander saw her by accident through the window, hunched, under her coat, her hair clinging to her cheeks. Without thinking, he went down. No umbrella, no coat, just urgency in every step. He met her at the service entrance, took her arm, and said only 2 words, "Come inside." She stared at him, stunned, unsure whether to obey or run. But his eyes weren't cold this time. They were afraid, and open, and desperate. So she followed him back into the building, and into something neither of them could take back. Inside, the private corridor, the air was thick with everything unsaid between them. "Why did you disappear?" he asked quietly, voice shaking beneath the control. "Why did you let me?" She whispered back, almost angry now, her chest rising with emotion. He stepped closer but didn't touch her. "I didn't know how to stop you." She bit her lip, eyes full of tears. "You made me feel like I mattered, and then you vanished." He clenched his jaw, then finally said, "I was terrified that if I touched you again, I wouldn't let go." And just like that, all the tension turned into fire-hot, messy, aching fire. They stood there, breaths colliding, hearts screaming louder than their mouths could. He opened the door to his suite slowly, giving her time to walk away, but she didn't. She stepped inside, shaking, heart thundering, her hand brushing against his as he closed the door behind them. Neither spoke, because the silence had already said enough. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of wet hair from her face, his fingers trembling for the first time in years. She looked up at him, not afraid, but open. Then he asked, "Are you sure?" And with a soft nod, she whispered, "Only if you're real with me." That night didn't begin with lust, it began with something breaking inside them both, and something healing in the space that followed. He touched her like a man who hadn't touched anyone in a decade, slowly, reverently, like she might vanish. His hands traced her arms as if memorizing warmth, his breath shaky, his lips uncertain but honest. She gasped when he kissed her, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. It felt right, terrifyingly right, like 2 storms finally meeting. In stillness, she let go of fear, of shame, of everything they told her she wasn't, and he let go of control, of silence, of the version of himself that only knew solitude. They undressed each other like a secret being told for the first time, and when they finally lay skin to skin, it wasn't about taking, it was about offering. She didn't speak, he didn't either, not at first. They just stayed close, tangled beneath warm sheets, breath sinking in the stillness of what they had just shared. Emma stared at the ceiling, heart racing, not from fear, but from the gravity of what had changed. Alexander turned to her slowly, like he wasn't sure she'd still be there. "I didn't know it could feel like that," he murmured. "Not anymore." She touched his face, gently, as if testing if he was real. "You let me in," she said, "and I didn't break you." He closed his eyes, held her tight around for the first time, slept without nightmares. When Emma awoke, sunlight was falling across the bed, soft and golden, warming her bare shoulder. She sat up slowly, pulling the sheet around her, unsure what she'd see when she turned, but Alexander was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, watching her with unreadable eyes. "I expected to feel regret," he admitted quietly, "but I don't, not even close." She reached for her clothes, suddenly self-conscious, but he stopped her with a touch on her wrist. "You don't have to hide," he said. "Not from me. Not anymore." Her cheeks flushed, but she nodded on state, because something in his voice told her she hadn't been used. She had been chosen. By lunchtime, the building buzzed with rumors. Staff had seen her leave his suite at sunrise. Emma tried to ignore it, but the stares became impossible to miss. One woman muttered cheap under her breath as Emma passed, and something in her cracked. She almost quit, almost packed her things and disappeared again. But that night, she found a note in her locker. "I don't care what they say. I care about you. A." She pressed the paper to her chest and wept, not because she was weak, but because someone had chosen her in the open, and that gave her the strength to stay. For the first time, she didn't want to run. Alexander called a meeting, unexpected, high-level, intimidating. The board was ready to confront him about his indiscretions and distractions, but he stood at the head of the table and said clearly, "I am not a machine. I'm a man, and I have finally remembered how to feel." They didn't dare interrupt because of his power, but because of his presence. He no longer looked like the cold king of steel, but a man who had tasted fire and refused to forget it. "I will continue to lead," he said, "but not at the cost of my soul." Silence followed, then slow, respectful nods, and in that moment, he reclaimed himself. Emma waited by the rooftop garden, unsure if she belonged in his world. Now that everyone knew, she expected him to hide her, to move on, to explain her away. But he came up the stairs with flowers in one hand and his heart in the other. "I don't want one night," he said. "I want us, whatever that looks like." She stood frozen, heart full and fragile, eyes brimming with disbelief. "Even if I don't fit?" she asked. He cupped her face. "You are the missing piece." And this time, she didn't hesitate to believe him. They didn't make promises they couldn't keep. They didn't rush labels or pretend things were perfect, but they began openly, honestly, vulnerably. Emma moved out of staff housing, not into his bed, but into her own space, chosen, free, respected. He visited often, not as her boss, but as the man who finally learned how to love. She filled the rooms with color. He filled her days with steadiness. They still had work to do on themselves, on each other, but they had already done the hardest part, breaking open, and now, they could finally build something real. Emma had never raised her voice at him before, but that day something snapped. He had canceled dinner for the third time, buried in business deals and old defense mechanisms. "You don't get to ask for me, and then hide behind meetings when it gets too real," she said. He stared at her, jaw tight, eyes dark, not angry, but startled. "You think I'm hiding?" he replied. "This is the first time I've wanted something to last. That terrifies me." She softened, but didn't step back. "Then be afraid, but stay." For the first time, he didn't defend. He just held her tightly, like he might lose everything again. Because that day, her voice didn't push him away, it pulled him closer. They lay side by side that night, fully clothed, no passion, just hearts beating near each other in silence. He held her hand as she read, and she leaned her head gently against his shoulder. There were no kisses, no fire, no breathless moments, only stillness, and a deepening bond. "Sometimes I think I don't deserve this," he whispered. She answered, "You don't have to earn love, you only have to receive it." He exhaled shakily, as if letting go of decades of shame. And when he fell asleep that night, it was the most peaceful rest he'd had in 20 years. Because she had loved him without needing to be touched, and that touched him more than anything else ever had. A package arrived addressed to Emma with no sender. It contained photos of Alexander from his younger days. One showed him smiling, relaxed, arms around a woman with cruel eyes and a crueler smirk. Emma knew instantly it was her, the one who'd broke in him. Alexander found Emma with the photos on her lap, her face pale, her hands still. "I didn't send those," he said quietly, "but I know who did." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Do you still feel anything for her?" His answer was immediate. "Only pity, and a reminder of how far I've come since I met you." And just like that, her doubt shattered, and so did the shadow of the past. Emma never snooped, but when looking for a pen in his desk, she found a ring box hidden, velvet, untouched. She gasped slightly, then closed it quickly, unsure what it meant, if anything. That night, she acted normal to normal, and he noticed. "Did you find it?" he asked gently, pouring wine with a small smile. Her cheeks went red. "I wasn't looking for it." He stepped closer, reached for her hand and said, "I wasn't ready to give it, but now I think I am." She blinked rapidly, breathless. "Now?" He smiled. "No rush. I just wanted you to know it's real." Emma hadn't spoken to her parents in years, but Alexander encouraged her gently to reach out. She called, trembling, unsure what would be on the other side. Her mother cried when she heard her voice. Her father apologized awkwardly, but honestly, when she hung up, she collapsed into Alexander's arms, shaking with emotions too old to name. "You gave me the courage to try," she whispered. He kissed her forehead. "No, you had the courage all along. I just reminded you it was still there." That night, she dreamed of a home with laughter, and woke up in one that finally felt Close to that. Alexander collapsed during a meeting. Exhaustion, stress, and years of burying pain. Emma rushed to the hospital, her heart clutched in panic, her hands cold with fear. He was stable but quiet, pale, and shaken. I pushed too hard, he admitted weakly, because I didn't want to lose what I've built. She kissed his hand. Don't build empires at the cost of your body. Build us instead. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and nodded. He stayed in bed for a week, and she never left his side. Because love doesn't just hold you, it heals you. There were no fireworks, no crowd, no speeches, just the two of them walking through the rooftop garden at dusk, the city lights glowing gently below. He stopped by the fountain, turned to her, and said, I don't want life without you. Will you marry me? She didn't cry. She smiled the deepest, most peaceful smile she'd ever worn. Yes, she said, like she'd already been living the answer. He slid the ring onto her finger, hands trembling but heart steady. And they kissed not like the first night, but like every night that would come after. Not wild, just whole. The ceremony was small, just close friends, soft music, and more flowers than Emma had ever seen in her life. She wore a simple, flowing gown, hair down, eyes glowing with a joy that couldn't be staged. He waited at the altar, not in black, but in ivory and silver, his heart visible for everyone to see. When she walked toward him, she didn't shake. She belonged. Their vows weren't memorized. They were spoken from scarred hearts, healed by choosing each other every day. I don't promise perfection, she said. I promise truth. I don't promise ease, he replied. I promise love. And when they kissed, it was the most sacred silence the room had ever known. They didn't rush that night. There was no fear, no proving, no testing. Just Emma and Alexander, husband and wife, rediscovering each other in deeper ways. He undressed her with reverence, not hunger, and she touched him like he was music. Their skin held memories of that first night, but also thousands of moments since. He whispered, you were always the one who saw through the silence. She whispered back, and you were the one who waited for my heart. They made love like it was a conversation, not a climax. And afterward, they simply held each other because love didn't end here. It began. Years passed but nothing between them faded. Emma painted no small works full of feeling gone. He kept one on every wall of his study. Alexander walked slower now, less urgent, more whole. They adopted a little girl named Elise, shy, like Emma once was, and brilliant beyond her years. Their home wasn't a mansion, it was a place filled with warmth, laughter, and peace. Sometimes at night, Emma would look at him and say, I still can't believe you found me. He would answer, I didn't, you let me. And in that quiet truth, they lived forever.